The death penalty definitely invites debate. People feel very strongly about it one way or another. So while the Supreme Court ruled that the states are allowed to use the death penalty for the most serious crime, murder, they have also ruled that sometimes the way it's administered can be considered unconstitutionally cruel. For example, it is not available to be used against a defendant who is developmentally disabled. Now, there also is a debate raging about what that exactly means, what constitutes a developmentally disabled defendant. Is it based on one IQ test? Is it based on an average of IQ tests? What if one test is above the mark and one test is below? So in addition to that, the actual process of execution has come under fire lately, and that is because the drugs that are typically used for execution have not been available. The manufacturers have stopped making those. So the states have sort of added some substitutions for those, which have not gone very well. They've resulted in some botched executions, which are clearly cruel and unusual based on anybody's measure. And that's gotten to the point where some states have even passed or considered passing legislation to bring back old methods. For example, think firing squad or hanging. In addition to that debate, though, and this is where I think the coming years the debate will focus, is the issue of the expense of the death penalty. It is well documented by all accounts that the cost of an execution case is, by definition, much more expensive than a life in prison case. The safeguards that are in place to make sure that no mistakes are made, the appeals, the whole process ends up costing millions per case as opposed to the cost of housing a defendant in prison for a year for life, which I think is somewhere around $30,000 a year, depending on the state. The other result of that is that the time that it takes to complete a death penalty case often means that by the time the execution is carried out, it's almost hard to remember what the original crime was for. Probably not for the victims' families, but it certainly can be, if not years, decades before the execution actually takes place. So it takes out that punitive objective out of the mix. In addition, there are some people that argue it's actually more punitive to make someone spend the rest of their life in jail. That this idea that jail is, 3 square meals a day and food and clothing and shelter is a little bit naive. That it's more punitive to lock someone up for the rest of their life than to actually execute them. I think probably the states will focus on the expense. One by one, states are eliminating the death penalty based on the expense, and also based on the DNA projects, the things that have shown that there are actual mistakes made in death penalty cases. Here in New York, we mentioned briefly the Lavelle, L-A-V-A-L-L-E case. That is the case that the Court of Appeals said, while we do have the death penalty in New York, it is unconstitutional to use it the way that it is currently written in our legislation. The judge has to tell the jury when they're going out to debate whether there will be an execution or not, whether the defendant will be put to death. The judge needs to tell the jury that if they can't reach a unanimous decision on whether the defendant will be executed, that the case will then come back to him or her, and the judge will decide whether the defendant will be in jail for life without the possibility of parole, or 25 to life with the possibility that there may be parole sometime. The Court of Appeals ruled that that instruction to the jury is putting undue coercion on the jury to come to a unanimous decision to vote for death. that if there's someone that feels that the defendant should be locked up for life and never see the light of day again, but not put to death, that they worry that that will coerce them to vote for death, because the option is that it goes back to the judge and there may be some parole involved if it gets to the judge. So because that instruction and the process has rendered the jury deliberations coercive, according to the Court of Appeals, our death penalty has not been available since that case was decided. The Court of Appeals said that it's up to the legislature to change that, and of course nothing's been done about that at the legislative threshold level. And there's not really a lot of incentive for the legislators to do anything about it anyway. So while it's on the books, it is not operable in New York State. Many other states have eliminated the death penalty. I'm not sure of the numbers at the time of this recording, but more and more, like I said, they're looking at the expense more than almost any other argument at this point. So we'll see where that ends up.